Chapter 1: The Maps That Time Forgot. The world we think we know is bounded by lines drawn in modern classrooms. We look at the globe and see familiar shapes: Europe, Asia, America. But if you dust off the heavy, leather-bound atlases of the 16th and 17th centuries, a completely different geography emerges. There, stretched across the vast, windswept heart of Eurasia, lies a name written in elegant, sweeping script: Tartaria, or Grand Tartary. It occupies the space where modern textbooks tell us only nomadic tribes, lawless clans, and barren tundras existed. It spans from the Ural Mountains to the Pacific Ocean, a territory larger than any empire of its day. According to the cartographers of old, men like Gerardus Mercator, Jodocus Hondius, and Abraham Ortelius, this was not just a vague geographic label used to describe an unknown wilderness. It was marked with precise coordinates, major rivers, mountain ranges, and established borders. In the 1771 edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, Tartaria is explicitly described as a vast country in northern Asia, bounded by Siberia on the north and west, which is called Great Tartary. The text accounts for various subkingdoms: Cathay, Tibet, and independent Tartary, detailing their regions and capitals. Yet, as the 19th century approached, these specific designations began to blur. The cities vanished from the cartographic grids. The name grew smaller, retreating into the margins, until it disappeared entirely from global atlases, replaced by the monolithic block of the Russian Empire and the empty, industrial expanses of Siberia. How does an empire that once covered the largest landmass on Earth simply evaporate from the collective memory of humankind? Was it a multi-generational, collective error made by hundreds of independent European, Asian, and American mapmakers who all coincidentally hallucinated the same borders and cities for 3 centuries? Or are we looking at a deliberate, systemic erasure of a civilization whose socio-political structure, technology, or sheer scale threaten the narrative of the modern world? Relax, clear your mind, and let your thoughts wander into the shadows of the past. Tonight, we unravel the mystery of the grandest phantom in human history. Chapter 2: The Lost Metropolis of the Steppes. Official history dictates that Siberia and Central Asia were always punitive wildernesses, frozen terrains where advanced civilization could not take root until the arrival of modern industrialization. But the earth beneath the snow whispers a contradictory story. Early European travelers, including Marco Polo and various Jesuit missionaries, spoke of cities buried in the deep forests and hidden within the river valleys of the east. They documented places like Cambalu, Changa, and Karakoram, not as chaotic tent cities, but as grand urban centers with stone walls, paved roads, and bustling marketplaces that traded in advanced metallurgy, fine silks, and unknown technologies. When we look at the ruins scattered across the Eurasian continent today, we find massive anomalies. Earthen ramparts extending for hundreds of kilometers, subterranean brick canals, and the foundations of stone structures that defy local nomadic architectural traditions. In regions like Caucasia and the Altai Mountains, complex irrigation networks exist that date back to periods when the area was supposedly populated only by primitive hunters. The mainstream historical narrative suggests these were mere outposts, short-lived settlements of forgotten tribes. But the architectural scale, the engineering precision required to build them, and the vast amount of stone and brick utilized point to long-term permanence. It suggests a highly centralized administration, an advanced understanding of logistics, and a trade network that spanned from the Baltic Sea to the Great Wall of China. Imagine a world where the East was not a dark void of history, but a beacon of light, connected by roads and rivers that have long since been swallowed by the taiga or buried under meters of soil. As the night deepens, consider the possibility that the vast wilderness we see today is not nature untouched, but nature slowly reclaiming the ruins of an empire that forgot its own name. Chapter 3: The Architecture of Light. There is a strange, undeniable consistency in the ancient buildings found across the globe. Whether you look at the historic centers of Paris, St. Petersburg, Buenos Aires, or New York, you see the exact same architectural language. Grand domes, towering spires, massive stone arches, columns, and intricate ironwork that seem far too magnificent, heavy, and complex for the primitive horse and buggy eras in which they were allegedly built. Proponents of the alternative history of Tartaria point to these structures as remnants of a unified, global culture that possessed a technological paradigm entirely different from our own. They suggest that these buildings were not merely aesthetic achievements or places of worship, but functional industrial assets. Look closely at the spires of old cathedrals, the metallic domes of ancient mosques, and the elaborate finials atop historic government buildings. In the lexicon of Tartarian theory, these were part of an ancient grid, systems designed to harvest atmospheric electricity. The use of red brick, which contains high amounts of iron oxide, acted as a semiconductor, while the quartz crystals within granite and marble served as resonators. It sounds like science fiction, an impossible dream of a bygone utopia. Yet, we know that in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Nikola Tesla experimented with these identical principles, attempting to draw free, wireless power from the ionosphere using towers that bore a striking structural resemblance to the obelisks, spires, and minarets of antiquity. Perhaps the Industrial Revolution was not the beginning of human advancement, but a controlled reset. A forced transition from a world powered by clean, wireless energy to one bound by cables, coal mines, oil monopolies, and financial control. Sleep now, and imagine a world where cities were illuminated not by fire or wire, but by the very air they breathed. Chapter 4: The Great Mud Flood. If a global civilization of such magnitude and technological capability existed, what could have brought it to its knees? The answer, according to the physical evidence left behind in our cities, lies buried beneath our feet. Walk through the historic districts of almost any major city in the world: London, Moscow, Boston, Seattle, or Tomsk. Look at the ground-level windows. You will inevitably see windows that are half buried beneath the pavement, doors that open directly into the earth, and basement levels that possess the grand architecture, high ceilings, and ornate carvings of a main entrance. Official history explains this away using the concept of cultural layers, the natural accumulation of road dust, paving stones, and debris over centuries. But architectural drawings and historical photographs from the mid-19th century show these buildings already deeply embedded in the earth, with workers excavating streets to reveal fully formed, pristine subterranean floors. In many cases, these lower levels contain full-sized doors and windows facing solid dirt walls. The theory of the mud flood suggests that a global cataclysm occurred somewhere between the late 18th and early 19th centuries. A massive, worldwide torrent of liquefied earth, possibly caused by tectonic shifts, liquefaction, or atmospheric disturbances, swept across continents. It buried the lower levels of Tartarian architecture, wiped out a vast percentage of the global population, and left the grand stone buildings vacant, waiting to be claimed by the survivors. It is an unsettling thought that the foundations of our modern world are literally built upon the rooftops of a buried past, and that our current infrastructure is merely retrofitted over the ruins of a lost era. The world outside your window is quiet now, settled over secrets we may never fully dig up. Chapter 5: The Grand Sovereign. Who were the people of this lost realm, and how was their society structured? The accounts of early medieval and Renaissance chroniclers do not describe the inhabitants of Tartaria as primitive savages. They speak of the Great Khan, a ruler whose wealth, diplomatic reach, and military discipline surpassed that of European monarchs. In old European genealogies, encyclopedias, and military manuals, the Tartars were often depicted as a multi-ethnic confederation. Their military tactics were legendary, utilizing advanced logistics, highly organized cavalry, and sophisticated communications networks involving signal fires and courier systems that could cross the continent in days. Their flag, bearing the emblem of an owl, a dragon, or a griffin, was recognized in ports and trading hubs across the globe. The treaties signed in the 17th century between European empires and Asian entities still hint at this forgotten power balance. The early Romanov Tsars did not conquer Siberia through empty, unpopulated space. They fought bitter, unrecorded wars against a massive, sovereign entity that held allegiance over dozens of principalities. When you read between the lines of official royal decrees from the British Crown or the French courts of the 1600s, you see the persistent anxiety of European rulers. They were not dealing with scattered tribes. They were dealing with an equal, if not a superior, technological and military power. As you drift closer to sleep, think of the kings, queens, and historians who systematically rewrote the lineages of the world, ensuring that the names of the true sovereigns of the East were struck from the genealogies of greatness and turned into myths. Chapter 6: The Great Reset of the 19th Century. Every narrative needs a blank slate. To build a new world order, the old one must not only be physically dismantled, it must be completely excised from the human mind. The 19th century was a period of unprecedented archival updates. Libraries burned with strange frequency across the globe. Monastic records, which held the localized history of centuries, were centralized, translated into standardized languages, and often lost or altered in the process. The fields of archaeology, history, and anthropology were formalized into rigid academic institutions, creating a strict, legally enforced boundary between acceptable history and unscientific myth. It was during this time that the concept of Tartaria was reclassified. It was stripped of its political and historical reality and turned into a mere geographic expression, a poetic, vague term for the wild, untamed lands of Northern Asia. The people who once identified with this culture were integrated into new national identities. They became citizens of the expanding Russian Empire, subjects of the Chinese Qing dynasty, or were categorized as disconnected nomadic tribes without a history of their own. The history books we read today were coded during this era of great institutional transformation. It was a massive, coordinated effort to standardize the human story, to ensure that every schoolchild from Paris to Vladivostok believed the exact same timeline of primitive evolution and industrial progress. But the truth has a way of leaking through the ink of even the most carefully written books. Chapter 7: The Silent Witnesses of the Exhibition Halls. At the turn of the 20th century, a strange phenomenon swept the world. The world's fairs. Massive, breathtaking expositions held in cities like Chicago, St. Louis, Paris, San Francisco, and Omaha. These fairs featured temporary cities of unimaginable grandeur, vast, classical palaces, towering obelisks, and intricate lagoons, all illuminated by millions of electric lights at a time when the surrounding residential areas were still lighting their homes with kerosene lamps. The official historical narrative states that these massive complexes, covering hundreds of acres, were built out of temporary materials like plaster of Paris and hemp fiber in a matter of months, only to be completely demolished, burned, or blown up when the fairs closed 6 months later. But looking at the high-resolution photographs of the era, the scale and perfection of these buildings seem impossible for temporary structures. The foundations were deep, the stonework immaculate, the ironwork massive, and the architecture perfectly mirrored the Greco-Roman style found in Europe and Russia. A more haunting theory suggests these were not newly built pavilions at all. They were the surviving palaces of the Old World, the final remnants of the Tartarian infrastructure in the West that had been cleared of mud and retrofitted for display. The world's fairs were not celebrations of future progress. They were the final viewings of a magnificent past that was about to be cleared away. Under the guise of temporary exhibits, the public was invited to marvel at the architecture one last time before the dynamite and the wrecking balls arrived to erase them from the urban landscape forever. Chapter 8: The War on Memory. To truly destroy a civilization, you must attack its physical monuments. Throughout the 19th and 20th centuries, the landscape of Eurasia and North America underwent a radical, violent reshaping. Ancient stone walls were torn down under the pretext of making way for modern railways. Massive burial mounds, known as kurgans, which contained advanced metallic artifacts, armor, and scripts, were excavated by state-sponsored expeditions, and their treasures vanished into private collections or the deep, restricted vaults of national museums. Names of cities were changed overnight. Ancient maps were collected and traded for sanitized replacements. Rivers were dammed, deliberately flooding vast valleys that had held ancient stone settlements for millennia. This was not merely the natural march of industrial progress, it was a targeted war on memory. By physically altering the landscape, the architects of the new timeline ensured that the physical evidence of Tartaria would become so fragmented, isolated, and ruined that anyone suggesting its existence would sound entirely mad. We see this pattern repeated across the globe. Whenever an old building is suddenly demolished under the pretext of urban renewal, or a historic site is closed for indefinite restoration, a piece of the puzzle disappears. The night is vast, and the earth is heavy with the weight of things hidden beneath the asphalt and concrete. We walk upon a world that has been deeply sanitized for our consumption. Chapter 9. The Residual Echoes. Despite the most thorough cleaning of history, fragments of the Old World survive. They exist in old encyclopedias, like the first edition of the Encyclopaedia Britannica, which explicitly lists Tartaria as a vast country in northern Asia. They exist in the traditional costumes of Eastern Europe and Central Asia, which bear symbols of complex geometry, frequency patterns, and astronomy that align perfectly with the grand architectural motifs of the past. They exist in the oral folk tales of elders who speak of a time when the sky was different, when the air felt alive, and when the earth was connected by a silent network of power. Even the languages of Eurasia contain residual roots, words that do not belong to the Slavic, Germanic, or Turkic linguistic groups, but point to an older, universal tongue that once united the continent. These are the glitches in the matrix of history, the small, overlooked details that the senses missed. Like a faint radio signal from a station that went off the air a century ago, these echoes still vibrate through our culture if we know how to slow down and listen. Listen to the quiet of the night. Sometimes, the truth is not found in what is spoken loudly by institutions, but in the spaces between the words, in the traditions that survive without explanation. Chapter 10. The Aftertaste of Truth. As we reach the end of our journey through the shadows of Tartaria, we must ask ourselves what this means for us today. We do not need to prove every extreme theory, nor validate every wild claim of atmospheric energy, ancient giants, or hidden technologies. The true significance of Tartaria does not lie in the specific details of its demise, but in the profound realization that history is incredibly fragile. It is a narrative written, curated, and maintained by those who inherited the ruins. When we accept that a massive piece of the human story could be obscured, the world around us becomes wider, more mysterious, and infinitely more profound. It frees us from the rigid, narrow timeline of endless, linear struggle and opens the door to a past filled with wonder, harmony, and forgotten wisdom. The grand empire of Tartaria may no longer exist on our modern maps, but it remains as a monument to human potential. It reminds us that civilizations rise and fall like the slow breathing of the earth, and that what is hidden will always wait patiently to be rediscovered by those who look closely. Let the questions fade into the background now. The world is safe in its slumber, and the past is secure in its secrets. Close your eyes, let go of the modern world, and rest deep in the quiet embrace of history. Good night.